The sea had gone to iron in the night, a flat black plate struck by a winter smith. Even the sound of it felt brittle. Jon stood atop Eastwatch's eastern parapet with Ghost pressed to his knee and watched the dark heave below gnaw at the rocks and spit back white rime. The sky was neither night nor morning, a pewter smudge waiting to decide. He could taste the cold, clean as steel, and hear the creak of tarred rope and timbers as the watch's galleys thumped in their berths. Men breathed fog around him. Somewhere a horn sounded 2 long notes, the cold turning them hard and thin. He liked the watch before dawn. The world seemed truer then, pared to shape and silence, easier to hold. Ghost's fur shone pale in the dimness, and when the dire wolf lifted his head, Jon felt rather than heard the low thunder that rose in his chest. The wind carried salt and the old iron smell of spilled blood, faint as a memory. Eastwatch was a hard place at the end of hard places, but the sea had not yet learned the names of dead men, and that comforted him. The wall behind him glowed in the night light, a long cold stone that led into forever. He rested a gloved hand on the parapet and thought of how small one man was before all of it, and then put the thought aside. A man could be small and still stand. The horn sounded again, and he saw them. Lamps shivering on a low black line, then the suggestion of a cutwater punching frost. Longships, 2 at first, then 4, then 6. He held his breath without meaning to. Long low boats, the kind that could kiss a beach or bite a keel as it pleased them. The sails were furled. Oars moved, frothed the iron sea with rhythm, each blade a flash and vanish. The lead ship had a prow carved into the rough snarl of a winter wolf or a kraken. He could not tell in the gloom. He did not turn when bootsteps rang behind him. "Cotter Pike says they won't use the West Pier, Lord?" said Dolorous Ed, sounding like a man who had lost something and expected to misplace the rest. "Says the Ironborn would piss in the water casks. Says they have already, likely, if they could reach him." "Cotter Pike would say that," Jon said. He had not put on the Lord Commander's cloak. It hung in his room where it could not weigh his shoulders. He had put on his sword, and that was weight enough. "Tell Cotter Pike they'll use the East Pier. Tell him I'll speak to their captain in the hard hall in half an hour." "You might wish for a cup between now and then," Ed muttered. "The kind that burns on the way down and fights on its way back up. The day promises you'll need either." Jon's breath smoked. "I'll have tea," he said. "Braver than I am," Ed said, and went to carry the message. Behind them the wall groaned, settling or speaking. It was hard to tell which. Ghost leaned into Jon's leg and stared down at the longships. The lead boat turned, a neat, sharp motion that brought its prow to the East Pier like a knife to a throat. Jon found himself holding his breath again. The wind lifted and showed him the banner snapping on the foremost mast. Not the blazon of the great kraken, but a spray of white words painted hastily over black canvas. The letters big and uneven as though done on a ship that would not hold still. Parley. The paint had run where the brush had been cold. Jon let out the breath he held, and it went into the world like a fog. "Parley," Jon said. "A word, at least." He touched Ghost's neck. "We'll see what it buys." They came up out of their ship like wolves climbing out of a ditch, a half-dozen first with a woman at their head. She wore a quilted jack stitched with patches of mail, her hair bound back with a strip of leather, her mouth a line that looked chapped by salt. She was not tall, but she took space like a taller one, shoulders squared, chin set, the kind of woman men kept an eye on because they could feel where the danger was. Behind her were her oarsmen, inked and scarred, eyes twitching to any movement. Their boots left prints in the frost. They smelled of salt and skins and old iron. She smelled of all those and pine tar. She took off her gloves and shoved them through her belt, showing hands nicked and healed and nicked again. "Lord Snow," she said without bowing. "You look colder than you did in my memory, and you looked colder then than any man should." "Asha Greyjoy," Jon said. He kept his voice flat, not unfriendly. "The sea brings strange gifts." Her quick eyes flicked to the dire wolf, weighing him. Ghost stared back, his red eyes slow as embers. "Aye, and sometimes she demands her share when you try to unwrap them." "Come in out of the wind," Jon said. We'll talk where the stones don't bite the feet. I've no fear of biting stones, Asha said. Then she shrugged, a short, seaward motion. But I've no wish to freeze either. Let on, Crow. The hard hall held a heat that felt earned rather than given. A fire of driftwood snapped and spat sparks into a chimney black with the last 100 years. The boards underfoot had seen men fight and drink and plan and die. They were clean, though, and the benches sturdy. Dolorous Ed set down earthen mugs of something steaming and retreated to the door with the watchman. Cotter Pike's face looked carved when he came in. Lean, knuckled, the man himself or with boots. His eyes were wary and hard on Asha. Asha let him see she did not care. They sat across the rough table. Ghost lay where John's boot would find him if he put out his foot. Asha cupped the mug, sniffed, made a face. Tea, she said. I thought it might be. It smells like grass they've taught to drown. John wrapped his hands around his own mug and let the heat kiss feeling back into his fingers. If you mean to mock our tea, Lady Asha, we may find little to agree on. If we are to agree on anything, it will be because we have less to mock than to fear, she said and leaned back. One of her men coughed quietly. The others looked everywhere but at the fire. We came quick as the sea allowed. If we had been quicker, I might have had more boats. You came to Eastwatch after having attacked our coast, Cotter Pike said. You and yours took sheep from Bay of Seals hamlets not a month past. Asha neither blinked nor smiled. I brought that back, she said with a jerk of her head. The lean of it, anyway. I told men what to do and what not to do. Men remember what they want, not what I say. She leaned forward, put both hands on the table as if it were a map. I came because sailors north of Hardhome are seeing things. Ice like stone, fog that speaks. Men who go ashore and come back wrong if they come back. Dead fish that do not float but walk out of the sea on legs that weren't theirs. The wind going quiet so you can hear your heart, and your heart saying run. I saw my uncle's face on a wave big as Pike, and when it fell it smashed a boat, and not with the water but with the cold. I have seen odd things on the sea, crows. I am ironborn. I do not run. But I tell you this as a woman who has stood on decks since before her first bleeding. Something in the north has learned our names. John swallowed hot bitterness and felt the world tilt a degree toward the pitch he had known since boyhood. He thought of Melisandre's fire, of red shadows on black ice, of the dead men moving like broken toys. He thought of the tales old sailors half believed. The shivering sea cracking and calves of ice calving with the sound of a god taking a breath. I know, he said. I know what learned them. Cotter Pike spat in the fire and the spit hissed. You know, that is worse, he said. We're not full of old wives here. No, John said. He put his mug down and felt Ghost's breath on his boot. We are full of men who have seen the dead walk and kill and keep killing. We are full of men who have burned their friends eye to eye. We know. His tone made Asha's men glance at one another. Cotter Pike did not lower his eyes, but his jaw worked. The wall holds and will hold, Pike said. The watch keeps. The wall was meant to hold men, John said, and surprised himself with the heat in it. Not winds, not seas. Eastwatch sits on water like a duck. If a lake freezes, a duck is a dead thing with feathers. He made his voice plain again. You came to offer something, so offer it. The ironborn woman leaned on her fists and looked at John as if he were a coastline she had not sailed and wished to know. Ironborn don't go in for pretty speeches, she said. But I'll give you words that can be made into a rope. The dead know the shore and they know the forest, but they do not know the sea as we do. They do not love her or fear her properly. I can keep ships moving where men who don't love her cannot. I can set hull against ice when a mainlander would founder. Give me harbor rights, here at Eastwatch and at any place between here and the sisters that can bear a longship's weight. Give me grain at fair price, wood at less than robbery, tar and iron at the right weight. Give me a promise you will tell the northern lords that Asha Greyjoy came to bargain not to raid, and that she came to fight the cold that eats bones no matter whose they are. In return, my fleet will guard the coast. We will scout north of the Bay of Seals, We will drag firepots at our sterns like comets and put them to anything that shouldn't be moving. We will pull men off beaches when your black boats won't dare. We will run messages in storms you'd call a wall. We will keep the dead from finding the little boats that carry the living. I'll take coin if you have it and promises if you've none, but I want oath as well. I'll give you mine. Cotter Pike's laugh was like a crow swallowing gravel. Iron-born oaths are like the wind in a drunkard, he said. Noisy and gone before noon. Asha's eyes flicked to him like knives. Say that to any of the men who followed me off a lee shore with a reef to starboard and a squall dead ahead. Oaths matter where death is crowding the door. She looked back to Jon. You've more to lose than your pride, Lord Snow. So do I. I brought 6 ships. I can bring more. Not all. Euron sits on my father's chair with a horn and blasphemies and promises of dragons. He sent men east, he sends ravens, he wears dead crows on his belt. But there are captains who will still answer to me. There are captains who hate him more than they hate you. She showed her teeth. It was not a pleasant smile, but it was true. You know something of that. Hate is a good wind when you have it at your back. Jon kept his hands where they were and his face still. In another turn of the world, he might have smiled. In this one, he let the fire heat his fingers and weighed the words. We can give you harbor. You will be under the night's watch when you dock, as all are. There will be no plunder and no trespass. If your men cannot keep their hands from our stores or our women, your ship will burn and your captains hang. In return you will be fed, refitted, and not bled of every copper. You'll run where we say, when we say, and you'll not go south of the 3 Sisters unless I tell you to. You think I came to carry your messages like a gull? Asha cocked her head. You think I want you to command me? I think if we are to live through this winter, someone has to be obeyed, Jon said, and felt the old ache in his chest that came with standing between men and their pride. You said you'd give oath. Give it to me, to the watch, to the living. Asha's jaw went tight. He saw where the bones of her face were under skin salt-chapped and wind-cut. You asked me to bend the knee, she said. No heat in it, only a recognition. I don't kneel. It puts a sailor's center where it shouldn't be. I ask you to stand with me. The posture is much the same. She stared at him long enough that the wind found a new voice in the chimney. Her men watched the way sailors watched a wave that might be bigger than it looked. He dragged in a breath, let it out. I'll swear to fight the dead and any that ride with them. I'll not set hand to a living soul's goods without asking, unless hunger's turned the choice to a knife, and I'll pay the price if we do. I'll give you men to stand watch in your hard places if you give me yours for my decks in storms. I'll bring more ships if I can recall them. I won't kneel. You'll put your hand in mine, Jon said and held it out. She looked at it as though it were a strange tool. Then she took it in a grip like a rope wet with salt and squeezed until bone pressed bone, and he did the same. Done, she said. Done, he said. Cotter Pike spat again, missed the fire this time. 7 bloody hells, he muttered. If I live long enough to see Ironborn and crows patting each other's heads, I'll wish I'd died young. You are not young, Cotter, Ed observed from the door. No, Pike said, but I can dream. They set men and boards and ink to the agreement because men like to have something to point to that did not move. Jon wrote the words himself, plain and without flourish. Asha marked it with an X that looked like a scar and said, When you live at sea, you learn to write on your feet. After that there were hours of the other work, the kind that did not gleam in stories. They measured out tar, they counted sacks of barley from the stores, they allocated birch for oars and ash for spear shafts and willow switches for men who would not be told. Cotter Pike had his say on how many watchmen would stand on each pier while Ironborn were at anchor, and how the firepots would be stacked near the rope walk but not too near. Asha named her captains as if she were spitting diced gristle. Christopher Longwave, Two-Axe, Urrigan Shy. Men nodded to names and avoided eyes. They planned patrols. Where the ice had shone last, where men had vanished, where it would make most sense for cold to creep unseen. Without knowing it, they talked like sailors of one fleet. Jon marked that in himself and put it aside for later. There was a moment in the yard between the hard hall and the rope walk where snow came down in a single white sheet like the sky had forgotten how to do it any other way. Asha stood with her face up to it, let it sting her cheeks, then hawked and spat. Ghost circled her once, not too close, tail lifted in curiosity. She raised a hand to the wolf and Ghost leaned in to scent her fingers. She laughed once, rough as a cork pulled wrong. "Ugly thing," she said, and scratched behind his ear. "I like him. He bites," Jon said. "So do I," she said. "If I didn't, I'd be dead." That day they sent the first patrol north of the Bay of Seals that had ever been manned by a watch galley and an iron-born longship together. The black wind took the sea like a knife through cloth. The night lamp followed a length behind, broad in the beam and heavy with men and firepots. Her black hull sheened with pitch until she looked like a starless night. Asha commanded the black wind. Cotter Pike, against his better sense, went aboard the night lamp with a bundle of old tin gods hung around his neck just in case any new ones were listening. Jon had wanted to go. Putting his boot on a deck had felt like the right shape for the day. But he had learned something about wanting, and this was not the moment for it. He watched them go out through the chop and into the sway, watched the oars bite and rise, bite and rise. The black wind's rowers moved like one man with too many arms. The night lamp shouldered the water as if it had offended her. The wind was cross. The sky never decided to be day. They found it 2 leagues above, where the coast curled into a spit that fishing men avoided because every winter it changed its mind. It was not much to look at, not at first. A smear of white in a sea of black. A floe drifting wrong. Every man aboard both boats knew the wrongness in the way you know a word spoken in a language you do not understand is about you. The ice was low and flat and had a shine like old glass. That shine moved where there was no sun to move it. Asha took one look and shouted for the men to ship oars. She leapt from the prow to the floe like a girl who did not know her joints, landed light, and put her palm to it. The cold came through her glove and went into her bone. She made herself leave her hand there. She had never liked letting a thing think it scared her. "Boot spikes," she said. And her men hammered iron points into straps and got on with strapping them to boots harder and quicker than any green crew. Cotter Pike swore, crossed himself with 3 fingers, and called for a grapnel. Jon, watching from Eastwatch through a spyglass shaped like an answer to a question no one had asked him, saw the men move on the ice like spiders. He heard the iron of the boots in his mind. He saw the way the floe did not rock as it should under weight, how it seemed to resist motion like a stubborn beast. "Light," Asha said. Her men hauled up a firepot, clay filled with lamp oil and pitch and the blue foul mixture they made from whales of whale fat that burned and would not be put out by the sea. She set it down on the ice herself and cracked the top. Then her captain Christopher put a brand to it. The black smoke went up in a rush and something in the floe side. Men breathed together. The fire ate cold slowly, bitten and then biting back, dropping clots of black in the blue flames. The smell was old, wrong, like a cellar that never saw light. Something moved under the ice as if a man were trapped below it and were pushing up with both hands. "Axes," Asha said, and they chopped ice into pieces that bled cold water that steamed. The thing pushing rose, became limbs and then a torso and then a man or the shape of one under 2 fingers of glass. He was naked. You could see the hair moving on his chest in the water, and the hair was full of lace of ice. His eyes were open. They were wrong. Not white, not blue, but the color of the cold between stars. He looked at her. Asha had seen men at sea lose parts of themselves and live. She had seen a man bite off his own tongue rather than scream when his hand was pinned between mast and spar. She had never seen eyes like that. They had no fear in them, no hate, no love of killing. They had the patient attention of deep water. "Back!" Cotter Pike snarled, voice tearing. "Back! Hold!" Asha said, and because she spoke the way she would in a storm, men held when they should have run. She put a boot on the ice above the man's face and brought her axe down. The iron bit through old glass and into old flesh. The man's mouth opened and a sound came up through the ice and into her leg, not through the air but through the bone. It sounded like a bell retched up from a wreck. She hit him again and again. His body thrashed under the skin of the ice, and then it stopped, and the ice stopped moving as if someone had taken their hand from under cloth. They pulled 3 more from the floe, not alive but not dead enough. Christopher Longwave burned his own beard when a hand came up and took it. It took 2 men to hold him and a third to cut the hand, and then he put his beard in the firepot himself. Cotter Pike stood and harried them and swore and made a prayer he would later pretend he had not made. When they pushed the long pole under the ice, it met resistance and then slid. The floe was bigger than it looked, went down like a table on crooked legs. It was not a natural thing. It had weight without mass, shape without reason. They burned it until there was nothing left but beads of glass that looked like tears. When they slid back to their boats, they did not laugh or boast. At Eastwatch that night men listened and drank. Jon did not drink. He sat with the captains and counted firepots and counted axes and counted what he could count without having to count luck. Asha said little. She sat very straight and turned a tin cup in her hands. Her eyes were on the fire the way a sailor's eyes went to the horizon even on land, to the place danger first shows itself. That was a scout, she said at last. Not one of theirs if they have sense. One they let see what it could see. Testing us, Jon said. Aye. She put the tin cup down. They learned something. So did we. Fire matters more than steel. You knew that already. I didn't know how much. We knew, Cotter Pike said. We know the dead burn and don't get up when they're ash. It's the cold men that are harder. The cold men, Asha said. She held the word on her tongue, weighed it against her own stores. In the old stories, they won't cross running water. The old stories lied, Jon said. Or they didn't know. We've seen them on frozen lakes. If the water runs, it runs under. Then we keep it running, Cotter Pike said. We break ice wherever it starts. We turn the shore to soup if we have to. We'll need oil, Asha said. Fat. Tar. Wood. Ships to drag the fire. Men to stand at the oars while their boots turn to stone. And if we don't want the dead to use our decks to climb onto our boats, we'll need grating and hooks and the small clever things captains hate buying until they've lost a man for one of them. White Harbor could be leaned on for oil and fat, Jon said. Manderley has whalers, the sisters too. But the Manderleys will charge us 3 times the going rates for iron-born bellies. You can ask them to put it on my tab, Asha said, grinning a short, sharp grin. We've a history. Jon let it pass. He did not smile. We'll need more men if we're to keep a line at sea. The free folk who fish can be trained to oars and ropes quickly, and taught not to piss into bilge and call it paying the sea your due, Asha said dryly. Aye, I'll take them. I'd take men from the Dreadfort if they'd pull in time. You have a rope, Jon said. We'll tie what we can to it. The rope they tied in the weeks after that winter day had knots at Sisterton and White Harbor and the fishing villages that clung to the coast like limpets that knew the tide was coming. Jon sent marshals with letters to the lords of the 3 sisters, words that said in plain script what he had thought he would never write. Ironborn will be anchoring in your waters, and you will treat with them under the watch's hand. Lord Godric Burrell wrote back on sheep vellum thick as his accent, saying the sisters knew what it was to do hard things under a hard sky, and if the watch wanted ironmen to stand in the teeth of a storm, they'd get neither welcome nor weeping. They'd get dockage and a price, and as long as the price was paid, they'd not get a knife in the back. At White Harbor, Wyman Manderley was said to be recovering from some illness, but his son Wylis received Jon's man and did not slam the door, which counted as welcome enough. The Manderleys would sell whale oil at a rate Jon did not like and would not argue. Manderley ships might carry casks to Eastwatch under convoy. If a longship escorted those casks and its captain had the wit to keep Ironborn on board and off the docks, the law would look aside while the work was done. The deeps don't argue with such arrangements, Wylis wrote. They drown both right and wrong with the same efficiency. On the sea, Asha's fleet began to grow. Not quickly. The Ironborn followed their own winds. Some refused to answer her summons with curses and holy spittings, and some with a laugh. Some came because they had seen the cold. Some came because a queen without a throne still wore the sea better than any man who sat an oily chair. She took them in 1s and 2s, And when they tied up at Eastwatch, she stood on the pier and looked at the decks for sloppiness and at the men for hunger. Those that were hungry and clever she kept close. Those that were hungry and mean she sent to Sisterton and told Lord Burrell to keep an eye on them. Those that were more mean than hungry she sent away again with a scrip of tar and a blessing which was not a blessing. She and John argued when they had time. She called his honor a pretty fish that swam where it should not, and he called her pragmatism a sail that did not care what it caught wind from. They did it more quietly than either would have expected. There were things to better spend heat on. He learned the ironborn names for knots and for kinds of seas a mainlander would simply call rough. She learned why he counted rations like a man counting fingers after a battle. "You'll run out," she said one night, when she saw the ledger and the lines of numbers marching toward a thin end. "Even if we don't die of cold, we'll die of emptiness." "Not if we plan," he said. "Plans die with men," she said. "But make them anyway. It fills the hours between waves." Ghost liked her. She started carrying small bones in her pockets because she said you should pay a toll when you passed a god's mouth. When she was drunk, she leaned her head back with her eyes shut and smiled. And when she was angry, she went quiet and her hands were very still. John found himself not minding when she smiled. He did not tell himself why he noticed either thing. There was no time for it. The first true attack came on a night when the moon was down and Eastwatch's torches wrote their own constellations. The watchman on the east pier heard the sea stop. That was the sign men learned to know. Everything doing what it should, then everything doing nothing at all. The surf fell flat, the wind forgot to blow. Cold went up into the bones of the timbers and into the bones of men. Men who had survived storms found their hearts beating like boys before a plunge. The fog came next. Not a fog you could cut with a knife. A fog that was all knife, a fog that seemed to have a direction. A horn blew one long note and then stopped with the sound of a horn breaking. John was already awake. He had begun sleeping in half armor with his boots beside the bed and Longclaw across his knees like a lover who demanded little and gave back much. He rose, dragged on the boots, buckled the sword, and stepped into a world that felt narrowed. Men were moving fast but carefully, like sailors on a deck that new men could not see was sloped. He smelled the fog. It smelled of old stone. Ghost was out the door before him like lightning. "Lamps!" he shouted. "East Pier. Keep the firepots away from the rope walk." They came out of the fog at a run, and it was wrong because things that come from the water should come wet and slow, and these came dry and quick, and their feet made no sound on the planks. The first man to see one died without understanding what he had seen. The second man, an iron-born boy who had not learned yet to spit only when nobody watched him, set a brand to a pot and swung for the legs of the thing. It went up with a sound like a gasp, then a scream. The scream went on too long. In the fire it was naked and thin, sexless, with a mouth too wide. It burned to violence and then to nothing with the speed of a lie told to a man's face. Men shouted. There were 5 more. They did not flinch from flame. They went around it, tried to go through it, and when they could not they went over the men holding it instead. Their fingers were long and closed too easily around a man's throat. Those that went down did not get up if there was fire, and some that did not fall did not get up either when their hearts remembered to stop. John moved where the need was thickest, a man with a sword, not a commander with a plan. Longclaw made a sound when it met what wanted to be a man and was not. The sword sang and the thing stopped singing at once. He knew, in the way men sometimes know before their eyes have time to tell their brains, when one of the others was near. The cold changed when they were near. It went from biting to knowing you by your old name. The fog moved and there it was, half seen. The shape of a tall man with armor that had not been forged, with eyes the color that haunts glass at night. It did not hurry. It did not need to. A watchman, brave, ran at it with a pike and the pike's iron head shattered like sugar. The watchman died as if something had taken small, neat bites of him too quickly for blood to bother. John ran. The world made sense and then it narrowed to where Longclaw would be and where the other would be. Ghost appeared from the fog and went for the other's legs like a hound punishing a bad dog. His jaws closed. The other turned with a motion like a shudder. It raised something like a blade, and the blade cut a spark from Ghost's fur without touching him. Ghost yelped once, high and furious, and went around the thing and back again with his teeth bared so far you could see the back of his jaw. Jon got there while the other was turning. Longclaw met the cold sword and did not break. It rang, not a sound like iron on iron, a sound like glass being stroked by a damp finger. The noise went into the bone behind Jon's ear and made his teeth ache. He grunted and pushed. The other had weight and no weight. It slid. Jon stepped into it and cut sideways. Longclaw bit. Bits of light like crushed stars fell from the cut and went out. The other turned to face him properly, and in its face he saw nothing but his own shape reflected tiny and far. It came with a flurry that would have cut a lesser man to parts, and he took one cut on the flat and another on the guard and turned a third with a motion he did not remember learning. Ghost went for the back of its knee. The other bent like water. Jon's boot found the edge of the pier, and for a moment he felt the empty underfoot. He refused it. He went forward because backward was wilder than he had time to consider, and in going forward he found with his left hand the iron hoop of a firepot. He shoved it with his foot. It slid. Ghost sprang away. The pot hit the other low, and black flame licked up the thing's calf like a pet that loved too much. The other Okay, down. That was pride or curiosity. Jon did not care. He put Longclaw through where a man's ribs would be and then up into where a man's heart might. The sound was small and vast and over at the same time. The other came apart like frost being shaken from a black glove. The air moved again. Men breathed as if their lungs had been given back. The fog thinned, not all at once but like a man waking. The sea remembered its work, and the surf threw itself at the rocks and laughed. The dead that had not burned lay like thrown dolls. Those that had burned were not there to be counted. Asha stood with her hair stuck to her face and her axe muddy with frost, grinning like a woman who had been told a joke by a god and would never repeat it for fear of losing it. She looked at Jon and then at the long black sword and then at Ghost. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and smudged ash on her cheek. "Well," she said, "that would have made a song if we had bards who could sing with their teeth chattering." She spat neatly. "I'll settle for being alive." They kept being alive for a while after that. Alive meant tired and bruised and twice as wary. Alive meant more boats in the water with iron grating over the decks and little furnaces bolted to the sterns, throwing oil and light. Alive meant free folk boys swearing at ironborn ways and ironborn men swearing at free folk ways and both learning to count on each other's arms when the sea went too quiet. It meant Jon's hand finding the hilt of Longclaw in his sleep and staying there. It meant Asha writing orders on a half-chalked board with a bit of old bone because chalk had run out and then snapping the bone in two and not caring. It meant the sisters turning a blind eye to a black-sailed boat offloading casks by moonlight, and then later sending a bowl of stew up for the men who had done the lifting because the stew had to go somewhere and there were mouths that might close forever if it did not. Word came south and east by the ways word goes when men are afraid. Gulltown heard. The Vale heard. Jon's letters earned him a short reply from Lord Royce in his old soldier's hand. "We hold what we can hold. The rest we will retake if we live." Lord Grafton sent no reply at all, but a cask of pitch found its way to Eastwatch with Grafton's sigil burned carefully small on the bottom to say someone had not forgotten their name. There were rumors from bravos of fog in the Titan's eyes, of ships lost between two candles. Rumor grew on rumor like ice on a rope that had not been checked soon enough. Jon tried to look only to what his men could do. He did not always succeed. The nights were long. Asha brought him a problem he did not want and could not ignore on the 10th day after the fog attack. She came into his chambers without knocking because she had forgotten to knock or because she did not care to learn. She held a scrap of leather with marks burned into it and held it out. He did not take it. She put it on the table between them as if it were a fish she had not the patience to clean. "From my uncle's man," she said. "Victorian's crew or one that once belonged to him. They have names for their ships like men have names for their stones. This one answers to Rattleshirt, for his deck has more iron than wood. He says Euron has taken men east. He blows his horn in the night. He claims visions. He says he will be the storm the cold rides on. He says nonsense, but there's coherence to it. He is coming north. His ships sail the narrow sea like black minnows, and he slows only to talk to red priests and to buy old gods' bones. He wants dragon fire and can't get it. He will take any other fire. If he finds us with our little flickers and our little plans, he will try to use them or kill us for them. Jon looked at the leather and then at her. He is your kin, she snorted. I and the sea is my mother. Kin are accidents. I did not choose him. I'd scrap him for a broken mast. He may be a madman, Jon said. We cannot fight both his madness and the cold at once. He rubbed his thumb against the oak of the table until the whirl of the wood felt like something alive under his skin. What would you do? I would not give him the sky to show off under, she said. He likes pageants. He likes to stand on a prow with a horn in his hand and madness in his mouth and watch men believe there's a point to all that noise. He wants to be the first to do a thing so he can pretend he thought of it. So we do it first, not his doing, ours. We set a line across the sea where the cold comes, and we set it on fire where we wish, when we wish, so it is our blaze and not his. A chain, Jon said, thinking of stories of a chain that once closed a harbor and ate a fleet. She shrugged. Your chain was iron. This one will be oil and wood and drift nets and old rope and 1,000 dirty trick sailors use when they pretend they are not afraid. A chain made of fire. We set casks 2 cables apart, heavy half-logs chained to them so they'll sit true. We anchor them on ropes that can be hauled in with capstans so we can open the line and close it. We sew old sails into flues so the flame runs along like a hungry rat. We use those little furnaces you've got and the iron pipes your smith hates to make to spit a line of fire onto a line of oil, and then we step back because when the wind takes it we'd like our eyebrows to grow back someday. We won't stop an army with it, but we might force it where we choose, and we might send anything in the water back up to the night that loved it. We can set it across the narrows between the Sweet Sister and the coast. If the dead come on ice, we turn the bits in front of them to soup. If Euron comes with his peacocks and their plumage, he can either catch his feathers or turn away. It is a plan that burns, Asha, Jon said, hearing Ed's voice in his head asking if he would like to roast a sausage on it. Do we have enough to make? Her mouth twitched at the corner. No, but we have enough to begin making it, and enough stubborn men to carry the rest with bad curses and better luck. They made it. They called it the burning chain, and the men who built it called it worse. It chewed hands and ate rope and asked back injuries of men who had none left to give and got them anyway. It went down in weather that made Cotter Pike curse in low Valyrian, in seas that made Sisterton ports shut their eyes and ears to things a sane man would have fined a ship for trying. Driftwood came spraying after storms as if the sea were paying them back for begging jars. Whales were scarce that year and the oil did not run as plentiful, and so they bought tallow from White Harbor that made the flame fat with a disgusting smell that clung to hair and hope. They set anchors in water that numbed fingers and froze eyelashes and never came away clean. They cut their hands and wrapped them and cut them again. The chain grew, link by link of oil and wood and iron cunning, until a line of floating hell sat across a narrow throat of black water. Men who had built it went out in small boats and tested the flues with little fires and came back with their eyebrows fried and their mouths split with grins. When the night came for its trial, it came on the same quiet boots. The sea hushed. The cold went attentive. The fog, this time, stayed above the water as if the water had remembered something. It gathered like cloth overhead. Asha stood on the deck of the Black Wind with her hand on the rail and thought of things. Jon stood on the pier with Ghost and with Longclaw and with words in his head that were no use to him. Now, Asha said to the men by the furnaces on the little rafts that would spit fire. Not before you're sure. Not too soon. Wait. It came not as men had imagined it. No army marching on ice, no grand shape to march behind, but as a pressure of cold that pushed water out of its way. A raft made a sound as its rope went taut and then snapped with a noise like cloth, and the raft spun, and the men on it shouted, and the shout made the fog above twitch. The water between the casks grew firm and gray, a skin forming where there had been break. A seal pushed its head up on the near side, looked at the men with a blank face, and went under again. Came up on the far side and its eyes were wrong. Now, Asha said again, and the furnaces spat. Lines of dark rose through lines of darker, spit out fire onto oil, and the oil caught like a betrayal. Flame ran in both directions and men breathed out and back. No woman had ever braided her hair so quickly or so true. Flame met flame in bright kisses and then began to run up the line towards Sister Flame. The flues carried it across the casks like a dancing boy across wine cups. When it reached the half-logs, it set them roaring like drunk giants. The fog lit orange underneath, turned the horizon into a bowl. Men's faces glowed like masks. The fire ran until it didn't run anymore, and where it could not run it crawled, and where it could not crawl it leapt. The water boiled where the oil had gone thin. The skin on the water's face shriveled and split. The cold pushed again, and the fire opened its mouth wide and answered. They came then, shapes in the glow, moving low and wrong. Fire took them. Some made that thin, long scream. Some did not. When the others came, they came not as kings but as shapes that hated kings. The flames bent around them and changed color without dying. They stepped on the thawing ice and it held them more than it should. They were careful of it. They came as far as they could. One came farther, the tallness of it wrong against the lines of the chain, and Asha, reckless, took a boat with 4 men and rowed into where the heat licked like a living thing and shouted to Jon without looking at him. "Make me a gap!" He made it with signals he didn't know he knew. Men hauled on capstans with curses and the chain opened its mouth. Asha's boat slid into the mouth with the surety of a fish. "By all that's drowned," Cotter Pike said. "She intends to kiss one." She did not. She intended to put an axe in its knee and to make it kneel to her. It turned to face her, and the glow made its armor blaze without warmth. It lifted its sword. In the flame the blade looked black as a night that had eaten the moon. Asha saw her own face in it for a heartbeat and thought, "You are not pretty, and when you die you will die as you have lived, without kneeling." Then the men behind her screamed, and she came back to the world, and the world came back to her hands. The boat bucked as the heat gripped it. She did not think of the wood splitting. If the wood split, there would be nothing to think about. She planted a boot on the prow and launched herself at the water between the boat and the other. 3 strokes would be water. The 4th would be ice. The 5th would be up. Her body knew these kinds of math. She rose on the 4th and brought her axe down on the 5th. The blade met something harder than oak. Her arms burned. The other pivoted with a grace that was more cruel than beauty. The sword flattened out of the line of her axe and then came for her. There was no time to think what would come next. And Jon was there at the gap in the chain with Longclaw and a breath left and none to spare. He came into the boat behind her like a force added to a sum that had been missing it. The boat lurched. The men swore. Ghost appeared where a wolf should not have been able to appear and did not touch the water, and that was something Jon knew not to think about yet or ever. The other turned to watch this new problem. Asha, not foolish, took the gift given her and brought her axe into the back of its knee where a smith's hammer might have struck a stubborn rivet. The other did not like that. Jon liked even less what it did when it did not like it. It retreated not into the fire but through it. It had a GHT to choose what burned it, apparently, and it chose to let the flame lick at something that was not itself. It drew the cold to it in a breath, and the chain's nearest flames guttered. The gap seemed to widen without a rope moved. The boat skated on an ice that was not there. Asha slid a hand down a rope and burned her palm stupidly and used the pain to think. "Back!" she shouted, and the men backed with oars and gods and luck. Ghost hurled himself at nothing and found purchase. Jon moved like he had fought on boats all his life, and Asha had time to hate him for it and like him better for it. He put Longclaw where the other had thought it had covered itself, and he did it with a quiet that made Asha's teeth ache. The sword went in. The world made that small, big sound again. The flame jumped like a kiss. The other, unwilling to bow to an Ironborn, bowed to a Stark instead. It fell apart into the air like frost on a window when the room warms. The blade it had held hit the boat and split it like a careless word splits a good plan. The boat took water as if it had been thirsty for years. "Out!" Asha shouted, and they were. Ghost had already found a way that wasn't swimming. Nothing else would have done, and so it wouldn't have. Jon pushed a man who had forgotten how to move and then hauled his own body onto the little raft where the furnace hissed and spat. Asha gained the same raft a heartbeat later. They lay like fish on a cutting board for a moment. Around them men hauled and swore and begged and laughed and did all the things men do when they realize their hearts have not yet finished with them. The chain held. The fire ran where it should, not where it should not. The cold went away without admitting it had. Dawn thought about whether to arrive and then did, sullen as a child. The ice turned gray, then dirty, then water again, and all the dead that could not bear a man's share of flame sank without ceremony. The others did not press again that night. Perhaps they do not like to do something twice in one evening. Perhaps the chain had taught them a thing they were not too proud to learn. Perhaps the dead count their dead. Asha did not care which perhaps it was. She lay on the planks and laughed until she could not do that either. Later, when men had decided wine was better than words, Jon found her sitting on a mooring post with her legs swinging like a girl. Her palms were wrapped. He had wrapped them himself without letting his hands shake. Ghost lay at her feet with his eyes on the water as if it were telling him a story, and he did not want to miss the last line. "You did that like a man born to it," Asha said without looking at him. "Are you sure you weren't switched at birth and raised in some inland kennel by mistake?" "I'm sure," he said. He stood beside her and did not sit. He did not wish to swing his legs like a boy. He also did not wish to stand like a lord. "I learned some things watching men who knew more than I did." "We all do," Asha said. "We all forget to say it out loud, because the saying feels like kneeling." She tipped her chin to the sea. "Your chain will not hold forever. It will hold long enough to force choices," he said. "It will hold long enough for gulls to find another place to scavenge." He put a hand on the post. "Old wood, old salt. Your uncle. He will come," she said. "Madmen come and they bring their weather with them." Her voice went more iron. "If he comes alone, fire takes him. If he comes with friends, we choose which friends we burn first." She turned her bandaged palms upward like a woman asking the drowned god for luck and laughed. "I do not love chains, Snow, but yours, I've a fondness for this one. It makes a good noise when it burns." He did not answer that. There were other matters that perhaps would be words one day and perhaps would be action and perhaps would be nothing, because winter ate many things before anyone could decide what they meant. He said instead, "When the north is quiet, when we can look away from the sea without being cheated by it, I'll send to Winterfell. The lords will gather again one day. I will say to them, remember what the Ironborn did while we were counting our dead. I will say, Asha Greyjoy held the line that held your wives and sons. I will say, when you speak of old griefs, remember the new grace." She snorted. "They will remember what it suits them to remember. If they are eating well, they will remember only what fits on a plate. Then I will remind them until they are sick of it," he said quietly. "That is the only kind of remembering that lasts." She looked at him then as if he were a coastline she had decided she might dare in a bit of fair weather if she had the right oars. Her grin was slow and not all teeth. "You'd make a poor Ironborn," she said. "You think too much of tomorrows. But I will not mind if your tomorrows remember me." There were more nights. The dead learned. They sent fewer and worse. Where the fire kept them, they went around. In places where the shore was too broken for a chain, they came with strange tricks. Ice that grew from the top down, stepping stones of air that turned hard under the foot and then not hard at all. Men died. Some names faded as if the world had never inked them deep enough. Others stayed. Christopher Longwave lost an ear and a hand and learned to tie knots with his teeth and the fingers of his other hand until he was better than the boys who could show off. Cotter Pike laughed once, and the men nearby were so startled they dropped a barrel. Dolorous Ed made a wager on whether a man could extinguish a fire with a stream of piss if he was high enough above it. Lost, and paid cheerfully with a blanket he had prized until that moment. The free folk and Ironborn learned the same curses. The sisters learned to cheat men in the same coin. The sea kept talking. Euron came, but not with a fleet. He came with 3 ships and with banners and with a horn W. With old lines cut into it that made some men's eyes water when they looked too long. He stood on the prow like a man who thought the world had to look back. He brought the wind with him and the dead behind it and the old promises that had never made a thing true. He blew his horn and the sound went out and did not come back. The fire on the chain flared and then dipped as if a giant had inhaled. The men on the boats forgot their names for a moment and then remembered that they were ugly and poor and cold and alive, and that remembering steadied their feet. "Shoot him," Asha said, as if telling a child not to touch a pot. She had an archer with a sister's longbow for just such moments. The arrow went out, and the wind Euron had brought grabbed it by the tail feathers with a laugh and stuck it under a feathered lamb that fluttered from one of his smaller masts. And Asha's archer spat and reached for another arrow and found none left because the world was not designed to please her. Then the horns sounded again and men flinched. Jon stepped into a boat with 7 men who would follow him because they recognized a certain kind of death when it waved. He did not feel brave. He felt necessary. Ghost went with him because there were places to be where a wolf could decide to be. They went out toward where the horn made the air thick. They went with fire and with the fact of men. The fire did not like the horn and the horn did not like the fire, and they were both too proud to yield. Euron laughed like a man in a story. He looked for dragons in the flame and found a Northman with a wolf and a sword instead and scowled like a child denied a sweet. It is possible no one had told him that the world did not care about his scowl. It is possible he had eaten everyone who tried. They did not need to kill him. They needed to make him go away. A chain of fire that is arranged with love can make a man go away. Men who have learned to spit fire like cats can make a man think again. The horn's sound wavered. Euron blew until his face went the color of the sea before a squall. Something in his horn cracked with a noise that men who did not know horns still felt in their ribs and hated. He threw the thing aside like food that had been good and had turned, and when he threw it, Asha made a small, pleased sound in the back of her throat as if a knot had gone the right way under her fingers. Then the wind went back to being only wind and not a messenger, and Euron Greyjoy, who had always been better at leaving places than at staying in them, left. It was not a victory to sing long about. It was a necessary thing done. The men who had done it went back to counting casks and checking ropes. That was what winter was, doing necessary things until you ran out of men. They were not yet out of men. That was enough. When the word finally came down the coast from travelers' mouths that the snows inland were thinner and the dead less bold, no one believed it at first. They had given up believing in true changes. But then there were 10 days when the sea did not hush when it should not, and 5 nights when fog lay like a blanket rather than like a hand, and 3 weeks without a scream that stayed in the chest after the throat was done. Jon found himself sleeping and waking without a sword hilt welded to his fingers. Asha took her boots off on a pier and put her bare feet on the wet wood, and that foolishness made men laugh with relief. They began to count. Not the dead. They had been counting them all along. They counted the boats still floating, the casks still full, the men still eating, the fires still ready. They counted what they had spent. They counted the time needed to go south and remind men they had lived because of places they liked to pretend did not exist. Jon wrote again to the lords, to the Manderleys, to the sisters, to the Vale. He wrote, as he had promised himself in a moment he did not think he would live to keep. Tell them Asha Greyjoy kept the narrow sea breathing. Tell them Ironborn and crows and wild men together held a line of fire and a line of men. Tell them when you speak of old griefs, you must also speak of new graces, or your tongues will tangle and God will hear the bad balance in how you tell it. He sent a letter to Winterfell. He sent one to Bear Island, because he wanted the little girl there to know there had been a time when the sea had been a sword and the hand on its hilt had not been his alone. He sent messages to people whose faces he could no longer recall and to men whose faces he took out of his pocket sometimes and looked at in the dark. Asha spoke, not loudly, among her men of a new kind of reaving of silence, reaving of fog. She liked the word. It felt like an old tool she had learned a new trick with. When the warmer winds finally found their way to Eastwatch, she stood on the wall next to a man who had been born far inland where the sea was only a rumor. Jon looked east at the brightening line and said nothing until the quiet had been paid with sufficient attention. When the winter breaks enough to trust it to stand up while you're not looking, he said, you'll take your fleet south. You'll anchor where you wish and where you are allowed. You'll be drunk in ports that never learned your name. You'll bristle at the tariffs and you'll pay them sometimes. You think you can tell me where I'll bristle? She said, amused and not. We'll see. I'm told I've a gift for it. You will go home too, he said. If there is a home where the chairs are not too bloody. If there is a sea that feels like the one you knew. Now that you've known this one under a chain of fire. She tilted her head, listening to the sea. It said something you had to have spent your whole life at it to understand. Home is a place in the mind of a sailor, she said. My mind is a wreck in places, but I can make it float. She looked at him sidelong, curious through miserly habit. And you, why? Will you go home? Will you be king, wolf? Will you stand in the place your father stood and pretend the sea hasn't soaked into your boots? He thought of Winterfell, of walls that spoke a gentler cold than the walls and of trees that did not expect men to bleed under them but welcomed it all the same. He thought of the watch, of a vow that had needed to be bent and broken and mended and maybe would be again. He thought of a chain of fire across a narrow throat and of a woman who had put her hands on old wood like she owned it. He did not yet know how to carry any of that where he might be told to go. He smiled a little, and Asha saw it and did not make a sound that would break it. I will go where I am needed, he said at last. If home is among those who need me, I will be at home. That is a poor sailor's answer, she said, not unkindly. But it will do. Ghost lifted his head. The sea lifted its mood. The sky thought about rain and changed its mind. Men on the pier below them laughed at something stupid. The world kept being itself, and the chain bobbed in its place, ugly and beautiful both. When the wind came it brought the smell of tar and of a life left in it yet. If there were songs later, they'd be badly sung and only by men who had been there. That was as it should be. They were not done. Men like them never were. But they had bought a span of days with flame and fear and stubbornness. And in that span they could stand and take a certain breath and look east and not be punished for it. That night, Asha took a cup to the end of the pier and poured the last of the tea into the sea, watching it go black and black. To the drowned and to the burned, she said, and because she was iron-born she smiled. To those who did not kneel. To those who stood, Jon said, and for once he did not think of how many had not. They did not make a vow then, because there are vows that cannot bear being said aloud. They made the kind you make with breath and with hands that still have use in them. They kept watch. They slept when they could. They taught boys to tie a bowline one-handed and men to stop lying to themselves about how fire behaves in wind. They waited for the next fog, and when it came, they lit what needed lighting. And the narrow sea, which had seen empires and whales and storms older than the men who named them, learned new names for a while. The iron chain, the crow's fire, the gray wolf's teeth. The old names would come back when the winter left. But there would be a notch somewhere in the story that would not stand out. A scar the sea wore under light, and minds and ports not quick to honor a thing would find themselves remembering a red wolf's eyes and a black ship's grin. If there were bards left after, they might make it prettier than it was. It was not pretty. It was true. In the deep part of night, when even a watchman allows himself a small lie of ease, Jon woke sweating, not from heat but from dreams like a knife dividing a loaf. He sat up, touched the wolf that slept the way wolves do, touched the sword, touched the table where the letters lay. He got up, went to the parapet, and stood in the cold because it knew his name better than any man. The sea did not hush. The torches burned without fuss. A gull shouted once and then was ashamed of it. Behind him he heard boots. He did not turn until the boots stopped beside him. They did not say anything. There was nothing that would not sound smaller than what the water knew. They watched the dark until it gave them a little light. When he could just see the line of the chain, he spoke without looking at her. In the morning, we'll send boats down to the sisters to check the anchors after last night's surge. In the morning, Asha said, in a voice of a woman who had survived more mornings than she had counted. And if the sea bites them, we'll give it something harder to chew. She put a hand on the ice-cold stone and winced, and then left it there. You should learn to like tea. I like it well enough, Jon said. You lie, she said, pleased, and when she laughed, the sound went up in a small cloud that hung for a moment and then turned to nothing. which is to say it turned to what men had always had to make their peace with. He found that, for now, he could make it. He stood, with her, facing east, and the narrow sea lay before them like a problem they had found a temporary answer for. It would be enough until another answer was needed. That was all any oath had ever been worth. That was all a pact could do, hold long enough for men to hold each other. They had done that. He would remember it when other sons refused to. She would brag of it when bragging could buy a drink, which is to say always. The sea rang itself against the piers in little notes like coins in a bowl. Ghost yawned, showing all the white in him that was not fur. Somewhere below, a man dropped something and swore, and then the sea swallowed the oath and returned it gentled. The sky thought of snow, drifted toward rain, changed its mind, and decided on a clear, hard morning that would show men everything they had made and everything they had not. They bore it as they had borne worse. They did not kneel. They stood. They watched. They waited for the light and for the fog, and when either came, they met it. The pact held in silence and in noise, in flame and in the old clean cold. And the narrow sea kept breathing,